Hello, good evening. Welcome everyone to our latest Explainer Series webinar. Thank you for being here this evening. My name is Jenny Mattingley. I'm the Vice President of Government Affairs at the Partnership for Public Service. And I know tonight we're talking about career transition, and I've been really fortunate to have a career that's led me in and out of government a few times. So I know how important it is to everyone to have folks to turn to for advice on navigating that transition. And it's why I'm so grateful to have our guests joining us this evening to share their perspectives and advice. And for those of you not familiar with the partnership, it's a nonpartisan nonprofit working to build a better government and stronger democracy. And one of the ways we do that is by convening conversations like this one to help support the federal workforce. The webinar tonight is focused on tips and tools, as many federal employees have to consider transitioning to the private sector, or in some cases, state and local. And for some of you, this may be the first time or the first in a long time that you've had to think about transitioning outside of government. And we know that it's overwhelming, particularly since it's happened so quickly and probably wasn't part of your plan for 2025 to make this job change. But before we think about the private sector, I want to take a moment to thank you for your work in public service. It's important and it makes a difference to our country. So thank you again. And I hope that you all will consider returning to federal service when the time is right for you. With that, I'm going to make a few quick housekeeping notes, and then we'll dig into today's content on federal employee benefits. Before we kick things off, our disclaimer. Oh, sorry, I've just had something fall, which is the first time that's happened and made a noise. Anyways, disclaimer, content provided during this session is for informational purposes only. It's general and provides an overview of the typical processes around various employee actions and is not intended to provide any legal guidance. If you do require legal advice, we recommend consulting with a qualified attorney who can assess your unique circumstances. Tonight, we're not talking about some of those legal issues, but we still like to put it out there. And also throughout the webinar, we'll answer questions that you submitted while registering. You can also submit a question anonymously through the Q&A function, and we'll work to get through those as well. We're not going to be able to answer every question tonight, and we have a series of explainer sessions over the next few weeks on additional topics and others that have been posted on our website previously that may cover some of your questions. So please be on the lookout for more webinars in the coming week, or go check out the resource page on the partnership's website. This one will also be recorded and posted on there. And finally, while this discussion is geared to federal employees, it's an open forum and we may have folks joining us from other communities, but knowing that we're really focused on that transition from federal service to other jobs. Before we go on, I'd like to introduce tonight's guests. I have three guests with us. Could we have you introduce yourselves? And then we'll get into our discussion. And so we'll go Dave, Michele, then Katy.
Thanks, Jenny, and good evening, everybody. Dave Mader. I'm a director here at the Partnership for Public Service for the past 14 months, but one of the reasons I want to participate in and talk with you this evening is I spent 36 years in the federal government and then another decade and a half in the private sector, and I've made that transition several times.
I'm Michele Woodward. I'm an executive coach. This is my 20th year as an executive coach, and I've worked with people inside the government and in the private sector. I myself also worked in the Small Business Administration, USAID, Department of Transportation, and the White House. And so I have a deep understanding. As a matter of fact, my father was one of the first people to get the SES level. So I grew up in this area, grew up as the child of a federal employee, and I feel like I have a really deep knowledge of how it all works.
Good evening. My name is Katy Hogan. I'm a director here at the Partnership for Public Service. I've been here for about 3 years. But prior to joining the team here at the partnership, I was actually with Ohio State University's Washington, D.C. office for 8 years. And in that role, I did a lot of career coaching, both one-on-one with students and alumni, but in group settings as well. So I'm really experienced in talking about resumes, cover letters, interviews, networking, salary negotiation, pretty much anything career development. I'm really excited to talk to you about. So I'm looking forward to sharing all of the gems that I picked up in that experience with you tonight. And just echoing what Jenny said, I really respect and thank you for your service in government. Really appreciate it. I'm really thankful that you're here tonight.
Great. Thank you all for joining us. And for those of you listening in, we will be putting links to various resources in the chat throughout the webinar, and particularly at the end. And just before I forget, you may hear from my colleague, Carrie, who's on our government affairs team. She'll be joining us off and on, coming on screen to help us dig through the questions and keep us on track throughout the event. So right now, let's jump into really why everyone's here. I would love for each of you to help us think about, for folks navigating their job search, especially one that was unplanned and maybe their first job search in a while, what high-level tips do you have for navigating the transition, especially to make it feel less daunting? And so, Michele, maybe I'll kick it to you first and then let others chime in.
I think one of the most important things you can do is manage your own energy. For some people, things have happened so quickly that you're still sort of shocked. And so to figure out a way to process that, but not allow it to hold you back, and to make sure that you're spending time talking to people about who you are and how you can help, what you can do on day one in another job, another role. Definitely process how you're feeling, but keep moving ahead and keep your energy up. So that may mean taking some time every day to exercise, to make sure you're getting your sleep, you're taking care of your relationships. I often suggest to people, Jenny, it sounds kind of counterintuitive, but if you volunteered for 10 hours a week, it's something that really mattered to you, that would give you that sense of meaning and purpose. Sometimes it even opens doors for jobs. But when someone says, well, what have you been doing since you left DOT? You can say, actually, I've been providing legal counsel to the lost dog rescue in Arlington, and I feel really good about that. And that's something that shows whoever you're interviewing that you really are engaged in your community. So that would be my high-level advice.
That's great. Dave, go ahead.
Yeah, I would like to jump on to what Michele talked about. I think one of the first things we need to do is actually make a plan. How are we going to sort of approach this, exploration of the next phase of your career? And, as I mentioned, I spent, most of my professional life now in the government, but when I started many, many years ago in my first job with an agency, it was a great job. I was there for 2 years. I loved it, had tremendous opportunity, added responsibility, and then all of a sudden, 2 years into the job, we went through a downsizing. And I remember the day I was told, well, we're going to have to conduct a RIF and you're number one on the RIF list. And, that really came as a real shock to me personally and professionally. And I, took a day or two to sort of to mourn a little bit about, wow, why is this happening to me? But then it was like, okay, now I have to actually plan what I'm going to do next. And I think it goes to what Michele said about you need to keep busy. I also echo the point about you can't be consumed by this 24/7. Go do something else. Go volunteer, go talk to friends, go talk to family.
Yeah, and I love all that. Yeah, I know that it can be overwhelming, and I think what Dave was sharing is just taking it one step at a time. When I coach students and alumni in my previous role, I always said, look, your career is a journey, not a destination, and there's always going to be a lot of twists and turns, and you get to develop the roadmap. You have a lot of autonomy in decision making in what you do next. So I'm going to get really tactical, but I'll keep it high level for now. Just take it step by step, but draw your roadmap. So I recommend taking an inward approach first, thinking about what it is that you can do. I think the first thing is get really clear on what your personal brand is. So what is it that you are seeking at this moment professionally at this time? So in like 60 to 90 seconds or less, what are you seeking? What are you trying to do? What are you looking for? And that can change, and maybe that has changed. So take some time and reflect and really tighten that up, that personal brand. And I know sometimes folks roll their eyes at the elevator pitch, but essentially your elevator pitch. And then I would also assess what you want in your bigger picture of life. Is it a full-time traditional 40+ hour week job? Is it part-time work? Are a few side gigs or contracted short-term projects more what you're looking for? Are you considering going into business for yourself? So these are all reasonable questions, but think about whatever your next career move is. What of those options or options I didn't list sound good to you, and where can you start to look for them? I would conduct a skills assessment. So you all have had interesting and meaningful work in the federal government. You have developed skills certainly that are sought after across different sectors. Really important to do a skills assessment. So look deeply, and I myself haven't done this in a couple of years, if I'm being honest. So now's the time to really dig in, look deeply. What did you do? What skills did you develop? And then write out tangible examples of when you got positive outcomes when you were exercising those skills, which can also feel really empowering to remember those achievements and skills within your professional profile as well. Assess your resources. Whether you realize it or not, you have a network. So think of your current network: mentors, former colleagues, trusted former supervisors, affiliations. I love what Michele said about volunteering. I volunteer once a month at an organization here, and there's people that I really trust there. So start talking to them, even if they don't directly work in the field that you seek to be in. And then, of course, and I think we'll talk about this, but update those critical career documents. So your resume, your cover letter, and so that internal work, that's all stuff that you control. So sketch your roadmap. I always like that analogy. Think about where you want to go and what it takes to get there, and start those key pieces. And then from there, it becomes a lot easier and you have a lot more clarity when you communicate externally, whether that's identifying professional organizations and joining them, attending them, building that network that you already have, creating new contacts, identifying potential employers, applying, obtaining new opportunities. A job search or a career pivot can be a really exciting opportunity to revisit who you are and the impact that you seek to make and what you want your career to look like in your bigger picture of life and living a fulfilled life. So I'll close there, but I'm excited to dig in where folks find it helpful.
Can I mention
Yeah.
one thing? Like,
Go ahead, please,
I want to
Michele.
build on what you said, Katie. It's because I think it's so important. Like, when you think about what are you good at that you like doing? I'm going to just make it really simple. Like, if you're good at something but you don't like doing it, there's no sense in trying to make a career on that. But if you're good at it and you like it, that's the thing to start to talk to people about and think about what's the impact for the other person. So, for instance, if you say, I am actually really good at strategic planning, and I can come in and run a strategic planning process for you starting day one. That is a very tangible thing for the person who's listening to you to understand and say, yeah, we need that. Like, so even though you may think I have all these government skills, if you've done a strategic plan, if you've done budget, if you've done hiring schedules or any of the HR functions, think tangibly about the things that you're good at and that you like doing. And those are the things to really center in your job search.
And that's an interest. Oh, go ahead, Dave.
I was going to actually build on what Michele just said and talk a little bit about sort of my experience. As I said, I've moved in and out of government now twice. And the first time, I was one of the, fortunate people that were under FERS and I could retire at 55. And I said, well, I could stay at the IRS at the time for another 10 years, but I really want to explore something outside of the government. And I sat down and actually did what Michele suggested. I sort of said, here's the things that I've done over 3 decades that I'm good at, and I really would like to continue to pursue doing them perhaps outside of government. And then once you sort of create that profile of what do I want to do, then it's where do I want to do it, right? And that, to me, what I suggest to people is do a lot of research where, Michele mentioned strategic planning or those kinds of issues. Where else is it done in the private sector? Do the research, and where are the 5 or 6 or 7 organizations or even market segments that skill is really, sought after, and then start thinking about what are the companies, what are the organizations that could be for-profit, not-for-profit, state or local governments, and go through that discipline process and keep a lot of those options open, explore them with individuals, go talk to people, and then start narrowing that down to, the 3 or 4 that I really want to dig into these and actually start, applying for positions.
And Dave, I think that's a good point. And Katie, you mentioned something about skills assessments. A lot of times, particularly in government, sometimes there's a thought of, well, I've done this in government context. Surely it isn't the same in private sector or vice versa. But when you break some of those skills down into their root components, they actually are pretty similar across many, many types of jobs. And so I know some of our folks are wondering, how they can sit there and think about, are there assessments people take? How's the best way? Dave, you talked about breaking it down. What's the best way to identify some of those skills? Michele, Katy, Dave, I don't know if you have thoughts about figuring out what are the skills, the top skills you want.
Well, there's an interesting way to do it, and I agree with Dave about research. I think it's really important. And if you look at job postings, let's say you go to LinkedIn or you go to Indeed or any of the job sites, and you look at a job posting that's kind of intriguing to you. Look at the words that they use for the skills that they seek, and say, "Oh, that's close to what I did. That is exactly what I did. It's just using different words." Then you just adopt the language that the private sector organization is using that describes the skills that you have. To me, that's the easiest way to kind of retrofit is to look at those job postings, the ones that you resonate with, and then use that language in your own materials, as Katy said, in your resume, your LinkedIn profile, and LinkedIn is really critical. So using LinkedIn effectively is a really important tool. I know you're going to probably talk about that, Katy, tactically, but
I agree with
Yeah,
everything.
go ahead, Katy.
I agree with everything. I mean, I see some questions too, like, do you have a template for a skills assessment? There's a lot out there and it can vary a little bit by industry. So I think we're going to leave you some resources at the end of our time together, but recommend just getting on the internet, potentially reaching out to your alma mater and seeing if they offer career coaching and resources for alumni. Many of them do, and I'll talk about that as well. But I mean, broad range, agree with everything Michele said, but think about like communication, problem solving, analytical skills, computer and technological skills. Those are often good places to start and then build from there, right? And again, think about how did that manifest in your career and your professional experience? And then what are some tangible examples? And that really allows you to reflect, get smart on what you've done. And then circling back to what Michele said, doing your research, reading job announcements, going to LinkedIn and seeing how are they categorizing this, right? So I saw one of you in your questions ahead of time said, what do I do if I've provided technical assistance to recipients of government agreement programs? I mean, to me, that sounds like it could potentially be a contract specialist, right? At a university, at a private sector, at a nonprofit organization. So a lot of it is research, but you can start really, really high level with the common skills that you hear, like analytical problem solving, communication, critical thinking, et cetera.
That's a great point. And Dave, maybe you could talk about this a little bit as well. And Michele, what I hear too, is you're saying research, is I hear the word networking. One of the best ways to research is to talk to other people and find out how you make those skills transitions.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we all have relationships, not only at work, but in our personal lives, in our communities, and, volunteer organizations that we're already involved in. I think the other important thing to think about at this sort of phase of your career is, we always sort of equate success to a moving to the next level. And I think at this point, when you're thinking about leaving the government, the question should be and this goes back to what Michele said, is like, what do I really want to do that I really enjoy? And that may actually require that I move more laterally than up the ladder. And I think we need to, not sort of prejudice ourselves by saying, well, if it's not a higher position, then I don't want it. But it may be the way actually to move into a whole new industry, a whole new type of business, and move up the ladder.
That's right. And maybe you have to get a whole different ladder. I talked to somebody today, a client who said, actually, maybe what I'll do is I want to own a bookstore, which is completely different, whole different ladder. And so this is a great time to dream and scheme and to think about what is it that I would really enjoy doing. And maybe it's a different timeline than you thought that you might have. But if there's an opportunity to go somewhere and do something. I wanted to talk about networking really quickly. I believe in relationship building. I don't believe in transactional networking. I really hate it when somebody says, can you give me names of 3 people I can call tomorrow? That to me that feels like a transaction, not a relationship. So what I prefer is to somebody say, hey, Jenny said I should call you because you're awesome and we have something in common, and tell me about your career and how does that all work, and do you have any advice for me? And we're building a relationship. Then connect with me on LinkedIn, follow me on social media, and you rise to the level of my radar. And if somebody calls me and says, hey, I'm looking for a communications professional for a foundation that works in global maternal health, and I know that you came out of that section, I'm going to actually connect you because I'm a connector. So I think if you think about how can I build relationships with people that may endure well beyond your job search, that to me is the right energy and attitude to take to networking. I don't know what anybody else thinks.
I think you're right, Michelle. And I wanted to build on what you shared. So in your example, you said, Jenny sent me your way to this person that you're trying to network with in that scenario. A pro tip that I always used to give my students, if you have a really wonderful discussion with that person that Jenny suggested you meet with, follow up with Jenny. Say, hey, Jenny, you were right. You sent me to Michelle. I reached out to her. We had an amazing conversation. Here's what we talked about. I really appreciate you suggesting her. Most people don't think to do that. And I think that's also a really genuine and important way to grow your relationships as well. On the note of networking generally, it sounds obvious, but make sure that people know that you're on the market. People don't know to help you if you don't ask for help. So the current job that I'm in at the Partnership for Public Service, which I enjoy very much, I got that because I saw a posting for a job at the partnership, which isn't even the job I have today. Got excited. I'd been on the market. I knew it was time for my next professional chapter, which was a little scary because I'd been at Ohio State for 8 years and I liked that job. But I thought, I really like the partnership. I've worked with them. This job looks cool. I'll give the person there that I've worked with in the past and that I know and trust a call. And he said, wow, he's like, you'd be perfect for this. Send me your resume. We didn't know that you were looking. And it's, of course, you didn't know because you can't read my mind and we all have complicated lives. So don't expect people to read your mind. Ask them for help. I think the other thing I would say on networking is I know it can feel scary. So start safe. And I alluded to this a little bit in the opener, but start with your safe people. So did you have a mentor or supervisor or just a coworker or somebody that you really trust from not even your immediate past job, but in your total professional picture? I would see if they can catch up, share what's going on in your life, genuinely ask about theirs. It come with asks too, though. Ask if they're comfortable reviewing your resume. Ask if they're comfortable mock interviewing you when it comes time. Every relationship's different, but start with your safe people. And something interesting that people don't think about when you're in those conversations, if they're folks that have supervised or worked with you or collaborated with you in the past, ask them, what is it that you thought I excelled at, or what do you think my value is on a team or in the workplace? It's not just to feel good, though it'll probably make you feel good, which is nice, but it's really interesting to get that external perspective. I've been bold enough to ask it again with people I trust and know, and their responses have been really helpful and not things that I would have immediately thought of. And it gives you language for those critical career documents like your resume, your cover letter, etc.
You are so smart. I just want to say that you are so smart. And I just want to say one word to our introverted friends who hear the word networking and it makes them just freeze, right? Introverted people plan on as many one-to-one connections as you can possibly have. And that includes email counts, text counts, telephone calls count, and one-on-one coffee, lunch, getting together. Today's pace of work is such that not everybody can give you an informational interview for an hour over lunch downtown DC. If you can get 15 minutes on the phone, that's a win. If you can have a text exchange with somebody, that's a win. If you can have a LinkedIn message with them, that's all a win. And for my introverted friends, that's a lot easier than the concept of going to a networking event in a big ballroom is like, don't do it. But that the wins are anytime you can connect with somebody and you can tell them who you are, how you can help, the skills that you have, and what you bring to the table. That's critical. So don't be dismayed if you're actually an introvert and the word networking makes you nervous.
I think that's a great point about finding the ways that work for you to network. And, Dave, I'm curious your take on this. Another place that we haven't talked about are professional associations. Throughout careers, people may be part of an association and they often have help or networking ability.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, it's hard. I can't count the number of different organizations when I was in government, whether it was the Association of Government Accountants or ACT-IACT, or, a lot of these organizations that are really focused here in DC are an incredible source of, to Michelle's point, just go talk to somebody, and to Katie's point is, if you're talking to somebody now, and there was a question that came in earlier today about, do I need to talk about why I'm looking for a job? I don't think in the DC area you need to even worry about whether people know why we're looking for jobs.
I think that's a great point. And it actually would love y'all's take on this, because I think it's something that's coming up in the chat as well, is that in the DC area, we know, but it also, part of why we know is because the market is going to be saturated potentially. There's a lot of people now looking for jobs at the same time, and just wondering what advice or tips you have in terms of thinking about how to handle that.
Well, I think the research is a little mixed, but somewhere like 80 to 90% of jobs are filled by personal referral. And as Katie said before, if people don't know you're looking, or they don't know your status, they don't know how to help you. And some people will not help you just because they're just not wired that way. They don't think that way. But a lot of people will want to help you. And so to just say, hey, I left my job on Friday. I got that email twice or three times today. My last day was last Friday. Would you keep me in mind? And I'm happy to do that. So I would also say, think about, we tend to say public sector, private sector, but there's the nonprofit sector. In the nonprofit sector, there's the advocacy organizations, there's trade associations, there are cause-related nonprofits. All those people could possibly have openings, and a lot of them are not governmentally funded. So there is no, what's the word I want to say? Echo of job instability there. Think about colleges and universities. Think about state and local governments. Think about if you live in Ashburn, like what are the companies or what are the things that are going on in Ashburn? Or if you live in La Plata or wherever you live, like what's happening here? And so, thinking maybe more local and maybe more broadly. I don't know what other people think.
It's Katie, I know it's reorienting a little bit about where your spheres are. And Dave, before I go to Katie, I'll say one thing Dave actually said to me years ago when I was transitioning out of government, is that the next job I have doesn't have to be my forever job. Right. And so taking that pressure off of yourself too right now when the market is saturated is important as well, because it doesn't have to be your forever job. It just has to be your next job. So Katie, I saw you jumping in there.
Yeah, I love what you said, and that I'll just reinforce what I said. Like, what is the whole life picture right now? I love what you said, Jenny. You don't have to sign on for 10 years or even a full year. Are you open to part-time work? Are you open to project-based or contract-based work right now? So you don't have to have the long-term answer. So get clear on what you would and would not do. I know I have a friend right now who is a executive director of a small nonprofit and does not, for many reasons, and personal and professional, does not want to do that any longer, but doesn't know what their next step is, candidly. So they've identified that they're open to short-term project-based work that they've already got leads or highly likely, right? So I love what Jenny said. To build on what Michele said, I also said at the top, have your elevator pitch. And I don't mean that to be overly formal or rehearsed, but just get clear on, this is who I am and this is what I want to do. And tell your friends, even your friends who aren't in your field, maybe don't ever really understand totally what you did. They may know someone, it may click. So even if you're at a social event or happy hour or watching a game or at the kids, soccer practice, share with your personal network as well. This is kind of an interesting one. If anyone in your previous work in government that you worked with left before, so like not recently, but even years ago, and they're working in state government or another industry or private sector, and their job looks interesting, that might be a person to set up coffee, not only to hear how they did it, what they think, what's different, but that might be helpful. And then I love what was shared on state and local government. I'll just share a state. I work on our early career talent acquisition portfolio at the partnership. the state government has already reached out to us saying, you know, how can we work together to see what talent we might be able to recruit that maybe unfortunately has left the government in the last couple of weeks. So there are folks that might be looking for you, and I would reframe your thinking in that way too, who might be looking for me, who's seeking my skills, and how can I get to them?
And I think that's right. Again, it goes back to there's a lot of skills, and leaving the federal public service, if that's your motivation. I know so many of my friends are motivated by public service, might be nonprofit. It might also be state and local government. I mean, that is a continuation of that public service journey. So I think it's a good way to think about it. Michele.
I was thinking like, well, if there are a lot of trade associations in the DC area and then also, you know, around. So if you're a microbiologist at the NIH, there's the American Society of Microbiology, right? And there are, if you're an architect that works at GSA, you know, like there's the American Architects, AIA. Like, so to think beyond sort of there, if anybody's ever watched The Simpsons, there was a Simpsons episode where Homer was out of a job and Lisa was looking for in the one ads for him and said, "Oh, Dad, here's a job you could do. It's a technical supervisor." And Homer says, "Don't be silly. I'm not a technical supervisor. I'm a supervising technician." And I've always laughed at that because it's the exact same job, just turned on its side. And so if we can all break out of our little boxes that we put ourselves in and think about how can I transfer these skills? Who really would love to work with me because what I know how to do? And so instead of calling yourself a technical supervisor, call yourself something else. Do you know what I mean? You
That's
didn't
a
think The
great point.
Simpsons were going to be quoted, did you?
I did not, but I am really excited that they were. So, so thank you for that. I mean, this might be a good time to transition a little bit into, we've talked about how people should think about this, you know, but we should probably transition a little bit into what are the specifics, right? They actually have to think about the building blocks of finding a new job. We talk LinkedIn and others, but you have to create a LinkedIn profile, a resume. You have to do those things, technical tips, you know, jargon, length, things like that. And so wanted to open the door a little bit to talking about some of those issues.
I think, Jenny, one of the things, you know, and I certainly went through this when I was leaving government because everybody knows how much government employees make based on where they are, right? And I think one of the biggest challenges as we leave the federal government is sitting down and actually thinking about compensation, because in a lot of the public sector and the private sector is very different about compensation and how they talk about compensation. Like, you know, as federal employees, we look at our GSA rate, you know, our GS rate and say, this is how much I make. When you're talking to a public sector firm, they're talking about total compensation. They're talking about health benefits. They're talking about other benefits, right? So we need to start thinking differently about how we define compensation and what is reasonable compensation in an individual's case. And then I think something maybe even more challenging is how do you actually negotiate that with somebody?
And that's something a lot of folks may not have done. If you've got a career in government, Dave, to your point, there's sort of a set parameters for that. Michele, do you have any advice on that?
I will often counsel my clients to ask the question, what's the amount you have budgeted for this role? So instead of someone says, well, what's your compensation requirement? It's really important to say, what do you have budgeted for this role? Because it's very few organizations that are going to say, we don't have anything budgeted. You know, we're completely winging this. They'll usually come back with a band and they'll say, this happened recently to a young client of mine, and the band was 75,000 to 90,000. And we had already coached and talked about it. And she went in like at 82 because that's what she felt comfortable with. And it was in the band. But I think, and I'd be interested in what Katy's thought is, but never throwing out a number. I did this early in my career. They said, how much do you want to be paid? I told them and they laughed. And that was when I was actually leaving federal government. I felt so dopey because I left money on the table. Whereas I had said, what are the other people who are in this role? What's their compensation look like? What's the budget? I would have been in a better, ultimately a better spot. And if they can't meet your budget, your salary requirements, you can also talk about things like having Fridays off, having them maybe pay for you to get additional certifications or training. In the non-governmental sector, a lot of those things are negotiable, including what your title is. Like if they can't compensate you where you want to be, but they can make you a vice president, that can be worth it, especially if you're just in the job, as a bridge between one thing or another.
And that actually, Katie, go ahead, and then I'll throw something out for you and for others to talk to as well about title. Is a lot of folks on this call may have security clearances too, and that's something to think about. So
I just wanted
Katie,
to
go
make one
ahead.
more note on the salary negotiation. I know it's now optional, but on the federal resume builder and USA Jobs, there is the option to put in salary. This is probably obvious, but to Michelle's point, you don't want to volunteer a salary history. If anyone asks, it's actually increasingly becoming illegal in states and localities. Get them to give the number first. I used to be a salary negotiation facilitator in my old job. And I had a friend in her late 20s who was going through a job search, and she said people keep asking, and I freeze and then give a number, and I didn't research it, and I don't feel good about it. And I said, don't give a number. Do exactly what Michele told you, which is, can you share what you've budgeted for the position? That'll help me answer. Of course, do your research and know going in, but always ask them. And she said it worked 100% of the time. That question, that's super important. And two, I would say know your walk away point. As Dave was getting at, salaries can look different, total compensation looks different in other sectors, but know what you would be willing to accept, and specifically with what trade-offs, as Michele mentioned. So maybe there's a great benefits package or work-life flexibility that is uncommon in today's market. Just be clear on that as you go into your job search. I think that's super important. And use the internet, do your research, and remember, state and local government salaries are likely public too, as are public universities. I worked at a public university, as I mentioned. Folks didn't realize that. Look up the salary history so you know what you should be targeting and what you can expect.
This is also a great thing to buddy up with somebody. Like if you've got a pal that's in the same situation you are in, or a couple of people that you buddy up and you share information. So if you find out that a job at such and such trade association is paying XYZ, share that information with your pod, so that everybody can be on the same page and everybody can be knowledgeable. Then we all, the rising tide lifts all boats. But that way you have people to bounce things off of. You can share a lead that's not right for you, but it might be right for them. But it gives you also that sense of meaning and purpose and giving back and helping others, which is so critical, as we talked about at the beginning, about your energy that you bring into your job search. So making a little group of buddies or having a buddy is a real help.
That's great. And just on that compensation and salary piece, I wanted to circle back. Michele, Dave, how have you seen it play out if somebody has a security clearance too? Because in the government, that's an add-on in some respects. It may or may not factor into private sector.
Yeah, there's the resource clearedjobs.com, which is a really excellent resource for people who have security clearances. You create a profile there. You explain what your skills are and what your clearance is, and employers actually will lob in inquiries to you. There is a premium when you have a security clearance, and most of the time they will tell you, because of your security clearance, it's like having an advanced degree in a lot of ways. It bumps up your marketability for sure.
Dave, when you were, you talked about some of your transitions into consulting, particularly in the DC area, but a lot of folks coming in and out of federal government make that transition. Are there any tips specific to sort of the contracting or consulting industry that you can think about in terms of how to talk about your skills, what to look for and to network on?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to an earlier exchange we had about how do you take what you've been doing and translate that out of government speak into industry speak? And again, I can't overemphasize doing the research. It's like if I want to go into consulting, right? And this is the capital of consulting firms. Then spend the time researching their websites. Look at sort of on their website, their clients, who are their clients? And then how do they speak about their business, right? Because, whether you're going into consulting or some other, professional segment of the private sector, we need to speak their speak, and we need to understand what they do. Because it goes back to what Michele said with The Simpsons. It could be like, we're so used to referring to something this way. Well, that's not how industry refers to it. So getting a better understanding is critical.
That's great. And Katy, this might be a good time. We're talking federal speak and moving away from that. A lot of people have challenges in the private sector coming to the federal sector because they have to create a federal resume, so to speak, that sort of thought. What's the opposite if you're going to create a resume in the private sector? It can be a little different than what folks are used to, or not, is where, some agencies have moved away from the big long ones.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about what a private sector, or again, when we're saying private sector, this is like non-federal. So this could be nonprofit, higher education, whatever. Really encourage you all to seek some resources that are specifically resume focused, but I'm going to try to do a 2-minute, like what I recommend for resume. So first I would just remember, what is the purpose of a resume? It is to get you an interview. So that is the purpose of that document. So think of it like that. And remember, if you get invited to an interview, they already know that you can do the job. So you want the resume to do that critical work for you. Really important framing. I know federal resumes are really long. Industry resumes are typically 1 to 2 pages. So you want to aim for 2 pages at the most. Another piece that I always like to mention when going from federal into non-federal roles is, in federal, I know that federal resumes are reviewed very carefully, and they're scored and they're certified. It can often be the case in non-federal positions that a hiring manager is reviewing each resume for less than a minute. And I know that can be really difficult to think about. So that means you have a really small window and you have really precious real estate. So what are you going to do with it? So you have to be really strategic. Again, this is going to be super high level. So 1 to 2 pages. Some may disagree with me on this, and that is perfectly fine. I encourage you to seek other resources, opinions, and ultimately do what's best for you. In terms of formatting and font and all of that, I really encourage you to make it as boring as possible. I wouldn't insert like images and text boxes and shapes and different colored fonts and kind of unique fonts. I know that it definitely looks more interesting, but you're trying to convey the information in a really succinct and strategic way. So I am really set on just a reads left to right, Times New Roman, size 12, black and white. But again, some people disagree with me, so I like to be fair, but that's what I recommend. There is another really good reason for that. One, if you are applying to bigger companies that use application tracking systems to sort of do the first cut, some of the text boxes and other pieces and non-boring resumes can be unreadable. So that would render you not qualified. They wouldn't even review the content. And 2, I've also had folks share with me, it can sometimes be an accessibility issue if there's lots of different colors and the font and the format is not reading left to right. It can be difficult too. So that is my opinion. But again, you can seek other advice as well. Resume components, you want a nice clear header at the top with your name, how they can contact you. If you have a LinkedIn, you can put your LinkedIn URL. They're probably going to search for you on LinkedIn anyway. Professional summary, so a couple of sentences about kind of what I've talked about from the beginning, who you are, what you're about. It's optional, but you can certainly do it. And then if you've been in the workforce for a couple of years, the next section is going to be your experience. So chronological, typically your professional work experience. I have seen narrative form where people do paragraphs. I prefer a bulleted list. But again, there are different ways to do it. Seek different guidance and make the decision that's best for you. After your experience section, you're going to want to have education. And then from there are other sections that you can include. You can include affiliations. We've talked about professional associations. You can have a skills summary, include any licenses or certifications. We've talked about volunteer work. I volunteer in the DC area. That's on my resume because it matters to me, but I think it also conveys some of what I'm about on my resume as well. And then of course, any awards or honors. So you want to get that all down to 1 to 2 pages. I've talked a little bit about this. There are some components on the federal resume that you don't want to put on the non-federal resume. Again, you don't want to volunteer pay for any reason, past pay. You don't have to list your supervisor or their contact info, and you don't have to list the average hours worked as well. So I usually keep it nice and tight for each experience. employer, the title, the dates that you were there, and then the location of your workstation, of course. You all have so much experience in federal resumes that I know this can feel overwhelming. A strategy that I often encourage folks to do is to have what's called a rolling resume that has everything that can be like 10 pages long. And this wouldn't be a federal resume because the rolling resume would be in the format that I just talked about. This is an internal document. So this does not get distributed externally, but what it does is it documents everything you've done in one place, and then it allows you to draw from that every time you apply. And to that end, I will just say, we should have said this, applying to jobs can feel like a lot of work. I used to joke with students, I'm like, yeah, it's kind of like having a second job, but you want to craft and tailor every resume to that position that you're applying to maximize your chances of what is the point of a resume to get the interview. So you, from that rolling resume, again, as an internal document, you'll pull the most critical pieces, again, precious real estate, build that 1 to 2 pager for that particular position. Each role should have like anywhere from 3 to 8 bullet points, depending. And then what I love to do, if you have dual screens, I like to have the job posting on one screen, my resume on the other, and then I start mirroring the language that's in the job announcement with what's in my resume, which the good news is I know that's the advice we give folks when they're doing a federal resume. So that is something that probably does feel really familiar to you. Remember that you want strong action verbs in the correct tense. So if you've left a job past tense, it feels small, but it can really make your resume look sharp. Detailed, quantifiable, action-oriented pieces about what you did, and then the outcome and the result. So tell them what you did and why it matters. You want to show that impact. And again, can't emphasize this enough, align the language within the position with that's on your resume. I think I'll pause there. Again, resumes, we could spend an hour just on them. We're going to put some resources in the chat, but those are my high level, what to do to get a 1 to 2 page resume that will make you competitive in the market.
And Katie, we'll try to do some more. I know, Dave, we were talking about this earlier too, try to get some more resources out there, maybe some more conversations on resume help. Michele, I know you had hopped off, and Dave as well, want to invite you into the...
I think it's really important when I worked with people who are transitioning from federal service to out of the government. A resume is really a capability. I always say it's a selling document. You're selling yourself. It's a capability document to say, I'm capable. I have done this in the past, so I'm capable of doing it for you in the future. It's not, your FBI background clearance. Here's on Tuesday, the 12th of February in 1984, I did this. It's really, how many people did I manage? What's the budget? Did I innovate something that had an outcome, as Katie was saying? But it is not listing of everything that you've ever done and documenting it. It's creating a case for yourself in this 1 or 2 pages that why you are an interesting person they should bring in. And so it is really a selling document. It's not a summary of your entire career. You really need to think about it's a capability statement so that they know what you can do for them.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to what Michele and Katie said, one, just building on what Michele just said. I mean, it's basically you're telling a story. Here's who I am, and here's what I've done, and here's what I can do for you. It is almost the elevator pitch that Katie's been talking about. I guess the only thing we didn't touch on, and I think it's important to raise, is be careful about ChatGPT doing your resume, because there was an article a couple months ago I was reading in the Wall Street Journal about companies that are just seeing the same language in multiple resumes. So I think ChatGPT, I've seen people use it to maybe get started, but it's got to be tailored to who you are.
And the other thing that I think Katie would agree with me is don't use the I pronoun in your resume. People sent me resumes that say, I did this, I tackled that. And it actually is not what we want to see in the private sector. So make sure that you don't use the I pronoun anywhere in your resume. Just talk about yourself in the third person. Katie, would you agree on that?
100%, absolutely.
And I think, Dave, going back your AI point as well, and I like how Katie and Michele described it as, selling your skills, creating a story, doing those things. you do want to stand out as somebody, people want to see your personality, so to speak. They want to see you in this without saying the word I that you just said. Because reminder, in the private sector, Katy, to your point, and I've hired in the private sector as well, you do get a lot of resumes and you don't have as many layers of folks going through the resumes. So the hiring manager may have that stack of 500 resumes, right? Or 50, however many it is. And so it is a different scale and scope. And so making sure that you're aware to that point. And Carrie, I've seen you come on screen, so there must be a question that we haven't gotten to.
Yeah, some really good questions in the chat. Appreciate everyone sharing those. One, I just wanted to say that we will continue to have webinars. I've seen a lot of asks about how do I craft my LinkedIn profile and resumes. We are taking stock of all of your feedback, so stay tuned for forthcoming webinars there. But one question that folks have, particularly for this federal audience, some of the sensitivities about how they might talk about their federal work, both what they can share about their federal job. There may be some things that they can't convey in a resume because of clearance reasons or sensitivities around the work. And then also how to answer that question of why they might be leaving government or have been separated from government and might be leaving not on their own control. And how to talk about some of the performance nuances that have come into play with some of the probationary period work now. So I know that's a meaty question, but just wanted to see if any of our panelists had thoughts on how to handle some of those sensitivities around both the work and about why they're looking for their next opportunity.
Well, I think everybody has news right now. I often tell my clients, take advantage when you have news. And so you have news to say that, there was a reduction in force in my agency of 1,500 people or whatever, and you don't have to go much further than that. And if you've been told that you're being let go for some performance reason, you don't have to share that. And it may or may not be accurate, actually. So you don't have to share that. What you really say is, I was part of this whole government action that you've heard of. And actually, I'm looking forward to my next opportunity to create a high-performing team, to, bring order out of chaos, to, to do a strategic planning process, to, grow your membership, whatever it is that you know how to do, and really be forward-looking. And so the other thing I want to say is, as I said earlier, you're most likely to find a job through someone who knows you, likes you, understands your skills and your capabilities. So in that case, your resume is important, but it's less important. As you mentioned just a minute ago, Jenny, if there's a stack of 500 resumes, honestly, the resume that I sent over because I know the hiring manager and I want to recommend this person is going to be on the top of the pile. So you can spend all day long lobbing resumes into these job postings, but the likelihood is that someone is going to put in a good word for you. So putting more emphasis on that is probably a more winning play. And when you're in a conversation with somebody and they ask a question, you say, "I'm sorry, that's classified. I can't discuss it. I know you understand what that means." The vast majority of people will say, "Absolutely, I get exactly what you're talking about." Especially if you're here in the DC area or any of Huntsville, Alabama, or anywhere where there's a large government presence.
I just want to make it clear, you also don't have to volunteer how you left your last job. And I think that's clear. I just wanted to make it especially clear. You don't have to ask. And I think the guidance Michele just gave on how to handle that, leaning into the news, would be important. If you are asked, you can use that strategy and then keep it forward focused. Talk about what you're hoping to do in the future. It goes back to what we said at the very beginning, having that elevator pitch, your purpose. What is your meaning in your career? What are you seeking? Start bringing them in on that vision and then continue on. It really, it would be surprising to me if there were lots and lots of questions about that. You do not have to volunteer anything.
And I think that's great advice. And there are a lot of folks who have taken pauses and pieces of their careers or gone to short-term work or other things. So I think now it's not quite as surprising when people have breaks or different types of work on their resume. I do want to take a moment to pause, recognizing that we're almost at time. We've had a lot to cover, and I know folks have a lot more questions, so we'll continue to get there. But along that same line, we would love to get input on sessions going forward. We've received a lot of great ideas, as Carrie mentioned, but we do have a quick 3-question poll if you're willing to take it. It is anonymous. It's just on here to help us understand how you feel about the webinar, how much you agree that this is helpful, and really future input and topics. So you'll see the poll on your screen. Go ahead and do that while we are finishing up here. While we've got just a minute or two left, are there any other resources that we need to highlight or think about in the links, or any final? I can do a quick lightning round. Katie, if you have more resources, and then maybe we'll do a quick lightning round of last words for our listeners this evening.
Thanks, Jenny. I mentioned this earlier, and Carrie's going to put in the chat, but not a lot, because I worked in higher ed, folks sometimes overlook your alumni club or alumni relations office at your alma mater may offer career resources. She's going to put, so my alma mater is Ohio State. I'm not endorsing Ohio State, but I think it's a really great example. I think we're going to put 2 examples in the chat. They have all kinds of videos. Like, they have an hour-long webinar that they did on how to write a 1 to 2 page resume. That is public information, but your alma mater may offer that as well. My colleague's alma mater actually offers free one-on-one coaching for alumni. So I really encourage you to think about looking at your alma mater, or look at maybe schools, even if you didn't go to them, if they have open source information. We also have, I think, 2 links related to the skills assessment that we're going to put in the chat and leave you with as well.
Great. Thank you, Katie. Michele, any last word for folks?
There are a lot of executive coaches and career coaches who are open to pro bono coaching, or coaches who are just getting started in their coaching practice, and for their certification, they need clients. So if you know anybody who is an executive coach or a career coach, reach out to them and ask if they can refer you to somebody who's looking for pro bono work, or for people who are trying to get their certification hours. Having a coach help you with things like organizing your job search, sorting out your skills, can be a real help. Not every coach will be able to give you pro bono hours, but it really is a good thing to ask. Georgetown University has a coach training program, American University does, GW does, so you can also reach out to those coach training programs and make yourself available as a project for a student.
That's great. Thank you. Dave, last words for our audience.
The only thing I would say is I know probably for the last hour your head is sort of spinning and like this is a lot of work. I dare say that in your jobs, you've done harder work than what we're asking you to do now. And my recommendation would be now is the time to start this work.
I think that's a great piece of advice and reminder for folks. And so thank you very much, Katie, Michele, Dave. Really appreciate you spending time and sharing all of your insights. Again, this webinar will be recorded. If folks want to go back to it or share it along, it'll be posted on our website at ourpublicservice.org. That's OUR publicservice.org. And we have a federal employee resource area where all these webinars are. So for those of you on the call, please keep the questions coming. Share with us what we can do to be helpful, and we'll continue to have explainer webinars over the course of the next several weeks. And really, don't forget to support each other out there. And again, thank you for your service. Thank you for the work you do for our government, and know that it's noticed and appreciated. And with that, I will say good evening. Thank you.